So I have laryngitis, which I've had maybe 3 times in my life, and I thought it would be gone by now, but it's not. So my apologies. I'm usually very loud, and I can't be, so I feel really muted here. So I'm sorry. Amanda, thank you, and thank everyone here who has made the visit so extraordinary, and to be around my colleagues is really wonderful. The morning sessions, I've just got this long to-do list of things to remember and lessons that I've learned. I can't wait to try and bring them all together. The talk that I imagined giving when I was first asked to do this is the talk that I'm going to start with, and then I'm going to take an existential leap because I'm kind of in a different place, and I want to raise some questions about the corporate university in real time. So let me begin with a prologue, by way of prologue, to explain what we've been trying to do at Washington University, and I've been the director of the center there for 8 years. Today I will be talking about our Studiolab, which is part of a broader program where we're trying to develop new forms of graduate education that are built around collaboration and community. So like many institutions across the country, WashU faces, the same kinds of problems. We have discipline-specific cohorts of students that are increasingly growing smaller and smaller. We can't sustain the seminar model that many of us had because there aren't enough students. You can't have a seminar with 2 people. And of course, we continue to rely on the kind of training methods that we were trained by. And then, of course, there's the shrinking job market that we've talked about. So we've been grappling with these questions since about 2015. In 2016, 2017, whoops, I went one ahead. We got an NEH Next Generation Planning Grant, and we used that to we divided into groups, and we thought through a few different things. One was how we could connect cohorts, like have an entering class, maybe have English history and art history, decide on a theme or something, where we bring in a class together in a collaborative way to bring departments closer together, still produce graduate students that are legible to an outside world, but actually create seminars that were multidisciplinary. We had a committee on coursework and employment outcomes and what were the connections between those and how could we be more clear, for example, in syllabi in articulating the skills and capacities that we were imparting to students in the way that we often do for undergraduates, but we don't do it for grad students generally. So to look at those, to look at what we could do post-ABD in terms of training, job preparation, what kind of mentoring experiences could we build in to graduate training? And of course, then there's this question of this proto-monograph dissertation, this albatross that we've been carrying around forever and ever. Like, how can we rethink that, get rid of it, have it and respect it, but have a whole lot of other things too? And then we wanted to look specifically at career advising. So Washington University kind of was on this kind of trajectory for undergraduate education. They poured so much money into it, and it worked. It's a highly ranked school now for undergraduate education, and they have an army of people who do career advising, like dozens. They have 1 career advisor for graduate students in arts and sciences. So we looked at these sorts of things. So through that work, we developed a proposal. We were invited by Mellon, the older Mellon, Earl Lewis Mellon, to do a proposal. And what we had figured out through the NEH process was that we were kind of the problem. The job market, there are other problems, but we actually were the problem, that we were the one of the largest stumbling blocks to reimagining graduate education. So we decided, rather than focusing on graduate students, we'd focus on ourselves. to focus on the faculty who train graduate students. Because most of us came up through a particular, we sat in seminars, we wrote the 30-page paper, we were given the list of books, we tore pieces apart. That was what we learned to do. We did not learn how to do radical listening, I will say that for sure. And then we applied for jobs at tenure-track universities, and then we took them, and then, repeat, start over. And that's what we did. So what we argued to Mellon successfully was that the next generation of grad students deserved next generation faculty. So that the transition there had to be a moment when faculty had the ability to stop, hit pause, retrain, and rethink. So that's what we were supported for. So we could develop those capacities to reimagine Ph.D. training in all kinds of ways that none of us felt prepared to do. So we basically had 4 different initiatives, and they would run every year. So we would have a fall workshop, and the workshops differed every year. They were by application. And people we did things from podcasting to public writing, all kinds of, and people who were good at this would come. We brought in external experts, but each year we got better and better at training ourselves. So those were the workshops. The last one was on public writing. Then we'd offer these things called cross-training grants. So if you're like, well, what I'd really like to do is in my history class, I'd like to maybe have students, with their phones make little videos or documentaries, but I don't know anything about documentary filmmaking. So we would give grants so you could go off for the summer and do, some basic retraining around whatever. We had a lot of people interested in sort of web design, various digital kind of projects, and we sent them all over the place for that. Then we also had very, I think, generous funding for curricular innovation grants, and those could be single, like me, myself, saying, I have this course, and I want to remake it this way, and we would support, for the summer for you to do that. Then we had larger grants that were aimed at a collaborative sort of effort, those that worked across disciplines. But the most ambitious part of the project were something we were calling Studiolabs, building new communities for living and learning. And our idea was to pilot 3 of these, 1 a year, over 3 years, that would be vertically organized, meaning they would have faculty, graduate students, community, they might even have some undergraduate involved. We were quite open. So we wanted to draw inspiration from the studio and the lab as more sort of collaborative workspaces, unlike the seminar room. So we began to pilot these. And so the idea was that they would have a planning year, and then they would actually unfold over the coming year. Now, as luck would have it, at that time, the previous dean of the graduate school was really intrigued by this idea, and we began to think a lot about space and community. We often talk about, graduate students, the isolation that comes, particularly once you're done with classwork. How could we create a space where community is more organic? It's kind of built in. So, how do we incorporate that into sort of the curriculum, but also into sort of a living, learning, kind of blurring the boundaries kind of space? So there was this old school, not too far from campus, called Lewis High School, which the university had used for like extra space for studio space for art students, and some people kind of maybe lived there. It was hard to say what the hell was going on. But eventually they went in and they did this massive renovation at the time that we were thinking about these Studiolabs. So the idea was, whoa, what if we had this giant building, which I'll show you some pictures of it here, where we could put the Studiolabs in there, and the end product of every Studiolab had to be a public-facing project. We didn't care what it was, whether it was a film, it was an exhibit, it had to be public-facing. So the Lewis Collaborative, they came in and they did an amazing job, and it was so energizing because we met with designers. So you have all these humanities people in there with architects and designers, and they would be, asking us, the art historians say, well, we have to be able to block out the light for, for this and that, and we have to be able to do this, and we have to have this So we worked together designing this Studiolab space, which was really an incredible opportunity. So in these photos, you see the one with the blue chairs, that's actually a coffee shop that is right across from the Studiolab space, okay? And then the kitchen-y area, that's a big public space. And then that's one part of the Studiolab. In the Studiolab, the walls are all glass, the ones that face inside. So the coffee shop is publicly accessible. So the idea was that grad students would be living in this building. Maybe they're not even enrolled in the class. Maybe other people aren't enrolled in the class, but they're like, what's going on in there? And so we would sort of break down the boundaries between campus and community, who's a student, who's not a student. Maybe you're writing your dissertation and you're up in your apartment, and you come downstairs and you're like, this is, and next thing you know, you're kind of hanging out there. We wanted it to be that kind of a space. And it was really fun to be a part of the design of it. Where am I in this story? So we have had 2 Studiolabs. This is not happening chronologically because I'm not talking about COVID yet, but I'm going to. The first one is called Freedom Information Acts. And this one was organized by the PI, was actually a scholar of Spencer in the English department, Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, Humanities, Digital Workshop, and Sociology. And it focused on making digital archives accessible to non-traditional scholars, in this case, incarcerated students. So it brought together faculty, librarians, graduate students from the humanities and social sciences to create this kind of accessible archive, but also to develop digital scholarly proficiency with the graduate students, creative public-facing kind of work, and project management. It was really boldly interdisciplinary. And the public audience for this were the incarcerated students at the Missouri Eastern Correctional Institute campus in Missouri. So they used the Henry Hampton collection of civil rights era documentary, a documentary film archive documenting the now. We have loads of material, obviously from Ferguson, from the Ferguson protest, and that became the gist. So that's just now winding up. They haven't had their final public-facing set of events yet, but it was highly successful given the strictures we've been operating under, and I'll talk about those in a second. The second Studiolab is in its planning year this year. This one I'm super excited about. It's called Memory for the Future, and it brings together a Holocaust historian and an African-American studies scholar who I was trained basically in sociology, but he's really interested in curation. So Memory for the Future combines collaborative study of the interlinked histories of colonialism, slavery, and genocide with the development of curatorial skills and public educational projects facilitating reparative memorial practice in and around St. Louis, very St. Louis focused. The public projects are aimed at building partnerships between students and faculty at the university with other universities in the area and institutions like the St. Louis Holocaust Museum, the Griot Museum of Black History, the Missouri History Museum, and our own library. Their collaborative pedagogical work is aimed at training humanities graduate students in public history, like George has been doing, and George came to us in that was in fall of 2019, and talked about it, and I think I can see you in this particular project because both people were very present there. So this is Engaged Humanities Scholarship, and what the instructors are really trying to do is think about imparting skills like writing for public audiences, visual design, and product management, etc. Now, as you might imagine, there's probably not a worse time than the past 2 years to launch something like this that's based on engaging the public. So we had delays anyway that were about, a PI was going to go ahead of sabbatical due and various things, and then COVID hit. Construction, everything ground to a halt. Finally, it opened back up again, and they had to fill it with undergraduates because of social distancing of undergraduates. So that was problem number one, and they can't kick them out because they're under lease, and they love the space. None of the public spaces have actually opened yet. So the coffee shop and all the places where, people were supposed to peek in and be interested in the actual work of the humanities, the labor of the humanities, that hasn't happened. And then another thing happened. We got a new chancellor, and we got a new provost, and we got a new dean. And they decided that the graduate school should be completely imploded, I think you would say, and that each school would have its own office of graduate studies. So that also happened this year. Now, let me remind you of the excitement of being a part of a design team, and all of the collaboration. So it was really difficult to watch what's been happening with this space. Now, I'm not a pessimist by nature, and I'm quite the opposite. But I'm closing this year out, my 8th as director of the center, and my last, with the creeping realization in the humanities at some institutions, and I have to say I was so heartened by much of what I heard this morning. But I feel like sometimes that whatever we create that is innovative, radically innovative, that's outside the box, will eventually get hijacked and revised into being something that's more of the same. So I had another idea. So Sumner High School in St. Louis is the oldest African-American high school west of the Mississippi. It's an incredible old building. Arthur Ashe went there. I mean, the number of people went to that school is amazing. It used to have 3,000 students, and now it's 300. And the St. Louis City has been trying to close it down for many years. So a group finally got together to try and keep it open and to try and rethink the space, and also to just stop the process. So to rethink the space as a high school, but also as a community center. So we've been in conversation with Sumner High School in the St. Louis about putting a Studiolab there. So let me get even further from campus, to North City, to the Ville, and see what will happen there. So we're actually working with a number of people at Sumner High School, community organizations, residents, and activists, to see about a course, a Studiolab, with a shared focus on historic preservation and imagining new futures for Sumner High School, as well as the Ville neighborhood. Some architectural history, and unfortunately, Mellon will not support, so some of this is Mellon money, and they won't support K through 12. So we're trying to find ways to directly impact the students who are still there, and I think I may have a way around that. We're still in the early planning stages, but I think that something might become of this. But I did wonder how far from campus do I need to go to sort of retain the autonomy of innovation? So Chris, you're listening, I know, and I'm so glad you're coming after because I've set you up. So is it, Chris, possible to remake humanities graduate training in truly radical, transformative ways in the post-pandemic U.S. university? Thank you.